Those of you online, we're gathering the in-person troops, and we apologize that you're there waiting for us. I want to do a shout out to Cal State Fullerton students. Yes, I still have pictures of the last time we were in person, and there was a similar class from Cal State Fullerton. So any Titans in the room? CSUF, yes, I'm right, Titans? Yes, okay, all right. Oh, Stephen Lambert, you make me cry every time you speak, but I'm so glad that you're our voice bringing this crisis to the table and to our awareness, and we all need to get that out even more. I also want to thank my daughter, who's now has a new nickname because of Pam. Where are you, Pam? I think she may have had to leave. So I'm going to start calling her Dr. Morgan Jr. There she is. Yes. So there you go. All right. So this next session is going to be a little different. Our keynotes are splitting the time, and Kathy McGibbon Givens is an amazing advocate and overcomer, survivor, thriver, every one of the titles that have ever been given. She is all of that. And she was at Ensure Justice last year that was all online. And I had so many people ask, can we have her back in person? And so we invited Kathy McGibbon Givens. And I'm going to introduce her now. Kathy is a wife, mother, author, writer, and advocate who has overcome the dark world of sex trafficking. After many years of living in silence, Kathy decided to journal what happened to her as a way of dealing with the surreal experience. That journal became a book. In your program, that book is featured on the same page with her bio. So I want to challenge you to reach out, order it on Amazon at the same time that you order mine, right? She partners with several organizations to raise awareness, fight for those who are being trafficked, and mentor those who have overcome it. Tomorrow, she'll be leading a workshop on mentoring circles. It's pure genius, and you don't want to miss that. She now uses her voice and expertise to inspire others to join the fight against such a horrible atrocity. She has presented to faith-based organizations, educators, students, medical professionals, law enforcement, politicians, and leaders from all sectors of society. She was invited to the Oval Office to witness a bill she advocated for be signed into law. And she joined the United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking by presidential appointment. She is the founder and director of 1211 Partners, and I'm going to let her tell you about that. So please welcome Kathy McGibbon Givens.
Can I move the mic? Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, give yourselves a hand for showing up in person this time. Aren't you guys excited? I'm really excited myself. So we're here, and it's how are our children? What about our children? How are they doing? I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience as an overcomer who was once a child myself. And we're going to get right into how we could have helped that child. I always regard myself as, man, I'm so inspired by this movement. I'm so motivated. And people always say, well, what motivates you? Really, it's my younger self. Like, who showed up for her? I'm sad for her and people that are much like her. I did not know that I had vulnerabilities until after I got out of the life of trafficking. Because while I was in it, I thought I was strong. I was raised to be strong. So I was born in Canada, and wonderful mom, wonderful parents. But my dad did leave the home at a very young age. And my mom was left to, be the single parent and, just show up in the way the best way that she knew how. Well, one year she said, hey, we're leaving Toronto, Canada, and we're going to go on summer vacation. And we're going to go to Houston, Texas, because we're going to go visit some family there. And so I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, talking to my friends as a younger self. I was about 13 years old at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Texas. I'm going to see all the horses and things. I'll let you know when I get back what it was like. And what happened was my mom got to Texas and realized, oh, wow, I really love this place. We're going to stay. And so I never got to go back and say a proper goodbye to my friends. That already, it may sound like a funny story, but that already was a vulnerability. I was in a new place with a single parent, by the way, who had to go to work to take care of my siblings and I. What did that child need? What did she need? And then so I get into high school and they say, I'm from Texas. So they say that everything is bigger in Texas, right? And that is also the expectations. I was expected to keep up. I was expected to look a certain way, to dress a certain way. I was expected to be popular and I was expected to date ill because when I left Canada, I was still playing with Barbie dolls like a kid. And I moved to America and it was like, oh no, you have to grow up pretty quickly, at least where I was from. And so another vulnerability, right? Now I'm in high school trying to figure out my life and trying to figure out how am I going to keep up with all of these people. I forgot to mention, so my parents are Jamaican. So Jamaicans that move way to Canada in the cold, I have no idea what that is. And then we moved to Texas. So I was like, I call myself a Jamaican Canadian, right? So I had this accent, this thick Jamaican / Canadian accent. And then I was in this school trying to communicate and make new friends with a whole new set of people. They didn't know how to treat someone like me. That was another vulnerability. What did that teen girl need? What did she need? And then because I was so vulnerable and because I was so much of a people pleaser at the time, I ended up being assaulted at the age of 14. I was still in high school. Didn't know how to tell anyone, didn't know how to tell my mom because I would just stress her out. She was a single parent trying to make ends meet to keep us in line, right? So I had one job and that was to go to school and come home, not go to school, come home with an older man and this happened. So how was I going to tell my mom? What did that girl need? So I make it through high school and I'm serving my community. I'm in ROTC. I make it, graduate with honors. I'm doing all the things right. And then it was after high school in my first year of college when I met an individual who said, oh my gosh, you're beautiful. Oh my gosh, I just want to get to know you. Oh my goodness, be on my team. Fell into a relationship with this said individual. And literally for a year, I thought I was in a dating relationship, but we all know what that was, right? Because we're here at this conference because we know that trafficking looks very different for most people. And for me, that year was what we call the process of seduction or the grooming process, or however you want to call it. It was that process that I thought I was falling in love and he was planning to capitalize. And he did just that after that year time period. I was still a young adult. I still had all these other vulnerabilities that I didn't know how to identify. What did that girl need? What did she need? Who could she tell about her previous sexual assault? Who could she tell about the sadness she felt from her father leaving the household? What was her outlet? What did she need? Who showed up for her? Who would show up for her? I didn't know how to express those things. And so, yes, trafficking happened. But thank God I was able to exit and get out of that lifestyle. It took a while because a lot of people say, oh my gosh, great, out. Woo, it's over. No, actually, that's when the fight just begins. As soon as I exited, I didn't know that I was in for a fight of my life, a fight to regain and regain my identity, regain my value, my self-worth, figure out who I was. what was my purpose for even being alive? Figure out how to communicate with society again, because I didn't feel like all of you. I felt like an outcast. So figuring out my place in society, how could I be a good parent? How could I be a good citizen? How could I be what I saw all around me? Because that was new to me, having just come out of the darkness. What did that young girl need? What did she need? And so my healing process took a while. It really did. And I always tell people, when they ask, well, how did you heal? How did you get over that? Well, I pretended. Literally, that's exactly what my healing process looked like. I would go back into church and I would see good people that I admired. And I would say, that's how you be a good woman. I want to be like that. Let me start acting like that. And then I would go to school and see people excelling in their classes while working, while parenting. And I was all of those things. And so I was like, I want to be a good citizen like that. And so I would just start mimicking all of these people around me to try to get my sense of like worthiness, I guess you would say. I wanted to get that. I wanted to feel what other people felt. And so I always say that I had a ton of mentors. What helped me was mentors that didn't even know that they were mentoring me at the time. And what did they do? They showed up and they were authentically themselves. They modeled good people. They modeled what purpose looked like. And I was able to see that and cling to that. It didn't take anybody, sitting me down and talking about my deepest, darkest secrets, or bringing up my trauma, the trauma from my past, so how many times were you assaulted and what did it feel? It didn't take any of those conversations. It really just took people seeing me as a person, seeing me as a member of society, seeing me as a woman. I remember my first job. It was hard. It was really hard for me to get a job because of the things that individuals who have been trafficked experience, right? Under the duress of their trafficker. I came out with charges. I came out with a felony. And I was like, oh my God, who's ever going to hire me? What am I going to do? And I remember getting that first real job, right? All jobs are real, but I remember getting that first job that gave me purpose. And it was as a paralegal. And I was like, I don't know how to paralegal, and she said, but I see something in you. But I have a background and I have all these things and everything's bad, but I see something in you. She saw me. She saw me answering the phones as a receptionist and running back and forth, just trying to rebuild my life. She saw me grinding. She saw me working, and she gave me a shot. And that was the first time that I felt like somebody got it. Oh my gosh, they know me. They see me for who I am. They see me as a person of God. They see me for what I can bring to the table. They see me as a citizen that can make positive contributions in the community. They see me not as just a survivor or a victim of trafficking, but they see me. And that's what was helpful for me. And now that I'm on the other side of this beautiful space of overcoming, right? Because I always say that, restoration is a lifelong process for individuals like myself that have experienced such traumatic experiences. Restoration is just a lifelong process, but the journey is so beautiful. So where I am now, I look back and I could not have done it without the people in my life, without community, without the mentors who didn't even know they were my mentors, without people seeing me for who I truly am. I couldn't have done it. But I also can't help but think, man, but it makes me really sad for that girl, myself, my younger self, because she didn't have the supports that I know could have helped her. She didn't have somebody to say, hey, there's counseling. You want to talk to somebody about that? You don't have to just keep it all bottled up and feel like you're yourself going crazy inside. You can actually talk to somebody, and you don't have to talk to people who probably have an agenda anyways, or probably can't help you. You don't have to talk to those people, but you can talk to a therapist. You can have access to counseling. I didn't know that existed. I didn't know that, oh my gosh, getting rejected from multiple jobs because I had something on my background. I didn't know that I could have access to legal help. Like, I didn't know that there was such a thing as clemency. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know about expungement. I didn't know any of that. So I just took a bunch of no's before I got that one yes. And let me tell you, that bunch of no's, rejection is real for overcomers. Rejection is real for those who have lived experience in trafficking, because every time you're told no, it's like a pushback, right? We all get it. Every time none of us like rejection. That's just human nature. We don't like to be told no. But as an overcomer, as a survivor, as one who has lived experience in trafficking, being told no is you hear this, you hear you're not good enough. Your trafficker was right. I told you wouldn't be anything. You might as well go back to the street. You might as well go back to the lifestyle because you're never going to succeed. Who's going to hire you? Who's going to employ you? Who's going to even let you in their school? What kind of parent do you think you could be? What kind of daughter do you think you'd be? Oh, by the way, you'll never be a wife. That one no, that's what we hear. All of those negative things. So imagine not having the access to employment, sustainable employment, or not having the access to legal help, or not having the access to housing or shelter or counseling, or all the things that we know that individuals with lived experience need. Every time you're told no, it sets you back. And so it makes me sad for my younger self. It makes me sad for her because, oh my goodness, wouldn't she benefit from some of the programs that we have now? And how much faster would her healing journey have been if she would just have known? And whose responsibility is it to tell her? Do we put all the responsibility on her? Because I think, a good friend said, we put a lot of responsibility on those with lived experience. We put a lot of responsibility on those survivors, victims, overcomers to get better. We have these things, just get better, like get over it already. And of course, we don't say it that harshly. But that's what it sounds like. That's how it's perceived when you don't stop, pause, see an individual for who they are and say, hey, I think I know someone that can help you. I think I know someone that can connect you to some resources. I think I know someone that can help you with the felony, which, by the way, you were nowhere involved in even getting that case, but somehow it's on your record. I think I know someone who can help you with that. It's all of our responsibility. It's our moral obligation to stop and help our children, to stop and help our youth, to stop and help anyone who's been victimized by this crime. It's on us. So what does that look like? Does it mean that we're going out in the street and we're kicking down doors and we're getting people out of these dark places? No. It means showing up in settings like this and being open to receive and to hear and to learn so that you can be full of resources, even if you think you'll never use it. Even if you think, oh my gosh, this is a waste of my Friday and Saturday. Even if you feel like, I don't know any victims, like, how could I really use this information? Be so full that when the moment comes, or if the moment ever comes, you will be ready. The overflow of your knowledge will be so authentic and so organic that people will come to you. They'll see, oh, wow, just by your speech, just by the way you communicate, they'll see that, okay, she has something. And maybe let me try to approach her because she's approachable or he's approachable. And then all of a sudden you're ready and you've identified someone who needs help. You've identified someone who needs resource to be connected to resources. It's really that simple. It really is. And I know we make it very complex because this is, it's kind of like an oxymoron because it's a very complex issue. However, we can make it very, very simple. Just show up and see the individuals for who they are, not their trauma. Because I can tell you, the trafficking experience is one little piece, even though it's huge, it's a big problem if we look at it, right? But the trafficking experience is one little piece of a person's journey. It doesn't make up their whole story. It really doesn't. So when we ask, well, what do our children need? What do our children need anyways? They need housing, they need shelter, we need food, right? They need discipline sometimes, accountability, right? They need all of those things for them to be successful humans, for them to be successful citizens in our communities, right? So it's not, oh my gosh, what does a victim of trafficking need? Oh my God. I have to go to all these courses. I have to get like all these degrees. I have to be like really engaged in the trauma-informed community. And I don't know a survivor. So what am I going to say? Like what? It's not that complicated. Calm down, breathe, and just literally say, what can I bring to the table? What would my child need? Or what would my younger self have wanted, right? What did I need as a child? What did I need? And that's what you bring. That's how you show up for people. Literally, that's it. People are depending on you. They're waiting out there. And I can tell you there are people right now that are being trafficked. There are children that right now that feel like there is no hope and there's no one that cares. But look around you. You're sitting here because you care. We're in a room full of people that care. Now, the question is, how do we let them know that? What's our responsibility? We have to let them know that. And that's how we show up for people. I always say, I can't wait till trafficking ends. Trafficking is going to end. And then I'll get corrected because people will say, well, it's a big problem. It's not going to end. And I'll say, it ended for me. So that's perspective. If you can end it for one person, we're ending trafficking. Yes, we can. We absolutely can. And so as you engage throughout this conference and as you're learning, just remember that you're not learning just to stuff your head with a bunch of knowledge. You're here to fill your hearts so that you can have a posture of readiness when your moment comes, when that time comes, when somebody truly needs you. And so that you can attract people who need you, who may not otherwise have come to you. But I guarantee you, they will be so attracted to that overflow. Those vulnerabilities, I'm telling you, I didn't know. Now I can look back at my younger self and I can say, oh, wow, you came from a fatherless home. Even though it was a good home, you missed your dad. And so when the first man came to you and said that you were beautiful and that you were lovely and that you were so smart and intelligent, you fell for it because I had that need. I wanted I wanted that void filled that I didn't even know was a void. So who was left to identify that void? The perpetrators. They identified it for me because they saw it. But what if someone like you saw it before they did? You could have met that void. You could have been the one to say, hey, girl, let's go hang out. You need to be around some positive people, some positive energy. Let's do something different, right? You could have been the one. And so that's why we're here. We're literally here to partner, to learn how to partner with individuals who have this experience, learn how to partner with individuals. And it's a true partnership because it's a collaboration. It takes two, right? It's not just you, the savior. I don't want you to leave with that at all. And then we have the victim down here. No, we're meeting each other right here. Just like you would meet a friend, just like you would meet a family member that you know is in need. Let's talk. Let's figure out what we need to make this a better and safer world for our children. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So we're going to invite Sarah Byrne, and then we'll have them both back up for questions. Please start submitting Slido questions. Sarah Byrne leads the Moore and Van Allen PLLC trafficking pro bono project representing survivors of human trafficking. Sarah's years of experience in representing survivors led to client demand for institutional training and advice on developing survivor support programs and compliance with related human rights law. She is, I'm not going to read the rest of it. It's in your bio, the bio in your program. Please come, and I can't wait to hear your response for what the younger Kathy needed with a felony on her record.
Good afternoon. Well, I had been having such a wonderful time at this conference this morning until I was scheduled to speak after probably one of the most powerful survivor advocates I have ever heard. I cannot compare, but I'm really pleased to be here with you today. As mentioned, I'm Sarah Byrne. I'm an attorney with a firm called Morin Van Allen in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I will tell you a little bit about the work that we do as a way to give an overview of the legal needs that survivors had. And in fact, most importantly, post-conviction relief, as Kathy had mentioned. So again, I'm following such a powerful message, and I will go along humbly to talk about how legal services providers can really work to reduce more vulnerability and hopefully reduce re-victimization. So the first, I don't want to get into all the legal needs because there's a workshop tomorrow. I'll pitch for y'all to join us to talk about the legal needs of survivors, but I'll just generally describe them in maybe 3 buckets as the experience with the program that I lead. So the first is post-conviction relief. Almost every sex trafficking survivor that has come through the firm's doors has had a criminal record. A lot of those records stemmed from conduct that was either forced or coerced while they were being trafficked, but many of it wasn't. Kathy had talked a little bit about vulnerabilities as children. A lot of times the same vulnerabilities that give rise to being trafficked give rise to engaging in voluntary criminal conduct. So our program absolutely sets out to see if we can clear the records of that, again, criminal conduct that may or may not have related to the period of exploitation. And it certainly varies by state and by statute about whether or not certain offenses would be eligible for that. But that's the primary need that we see for the survivors that we serve. The second area, and is my personal area of focus, is representing survivors if they are involved in an investigation or a prosecution of those that exploited them. And that can come in a couple different forms. That can be federal or state law enforcement questioning them about their exploitation and them either wanting to participate or not, and ensuring that their rights are protected through that process. Or a survivor, when we're talking about children, most of my child clients have wanted to report. Law enforcement was not questioning them, but I had so many minor clients that have said to me, I don't want this to happen to somebody else. So if I talk to the police, if that might help prevent that, that's what I want to do. And in our minds, we think they deserve a free lawyer to advocate for them in that process, again, because their rights can be at stake in that process. And that representation continues through a prosecution if a prosecution in fact happens. And that can include making sure that the role that they want to play in that is honored, whether they want to testify or not, what type of questions they're comfortable testifying about, through to their role in if there's a conviction, into sentencing and restitution, which is the way in which a defendant has to pay monetarily the survivor back for the work that he or she did and was not paid for. We all know that that does not make a survivor whole, but it's a really important piece in financial security and a sense of justice for survivors. And that, again, that extends all the way through to sentencing, even enforcement of restitution after that. And then the third area of service is kind of what I just described as everything else. We do a lot of custody work for survivors who lost either custodial or visitation rights to their children while they were being trafficked, to immigration relief, such as helping them receive a T visa if they're foreign born and they do not have status, helping with name changes. We do a lot of name changes. And landlord tenant, really any legal need, we set out to meet the comprehensive legal needs of survivors. I'm going to briefly mention, because Dr. Morgan, I think, really thinks it's important that we get the message out about the National Survivor Law Collective. And that's an organization that I helped form at the beginning of the pandemic, believe it or not. There's a number of us that do this work across the country, but I used to go to conferences like this, felt like I was the only lawyer in the room. And then I would hear after the conference that there was someone who did what I did, but I didn't get a chance to talk to them during the conference. And turns out I had a client that might have had a need in that area where they lived, and if only I knew that person. So there was not a network of us that provided trauma-informed legal services for survivors free of charge. So that's exactly what the National Survivor Law Collective does. It's a collaboration of attorneys across the country that provide trauma-informed legal representation in all of the legal needs that survivors may have. So again, we formalized what was kind of an informal and disconnected network, and we have a listserv where, you know, for example, if I have a survivor client that needs an expunction in Providence, Rhode Island, but I don't know anyone there who does the type of work that we do, then I put it over the listserv, and we are more quickly connected to a trauma-informed lawyer in that area to do the work. So I really want to get the message out, and I'm grateful to Dr. Morgan for giving me a platform to talk about the National Survivor Law Collective, because we're finding it's providing access to free lawyers for survivors across the country in a much more efficient way than we were doing it before. We also do trauma-informed legal representation trainings together, and we engage in a lot of legislative advocacy, which I'll talk about in a second. So restorative justice, you've heard that term mentioned today, and you're going to hear a panel about it this afternoon, but I wanted to provide the sort of definition of restorative justice from the perspective of a legal advocate. So restorative justice, I have come to learn after working with hundreds of forced labor and sex trafficking clients, is justice as defined by the survivor. For those of us lawyers, usually when we represent clients, there's an objective goal that we're pursuing on behalf of the client, and that's pretty consistent with the other clients we've served with similar experiences. So we almost always want a conviction or an exoneration or some sort of legal remedy or relief or access to a public benefit. There's just this objective standard about what would be successful in representing a client. I learned pretty early on in my work through so many clients, and I'm so grateful for teaching me this lesson, that justice can only be defined by the subjective experience of each survivor client. And I continue to this day to think a survivor client is going to want a certain result, and turns out he or she that's not their number one priority. Or their goal may change. And we have to, and we'll talk about this in the workshop tomorrow, we have to be flexible and follow their direction and their legal or non-legal goals as they change over the time of the relationship. So Dr. Morgan said something that really struck me this morning. And it's really helped me further define restorative justice. She said, she's talking about restoration, and she said, maybe less is more. And that's exactly what I have discovered with my clients. And it really, the light bulb didn't go off until this morning. So I'd like to share 3 client stories with you all to demonstrate that maybe less more for purposes of restorative justice. So the first is one of my very first survivor clients many years ago, a young woman who was trying to pursue her certified nursing assistant degree. And what she had a criminal record, and she believed, and I can't remember if this was in fact true, that her criminal record was going to get in the way of her being able to apply for a CNA. So she came to the firm and sat down, and I said, you know, how can I help you? What is your legal need? And she had, I can't even remember what the record was at the time. She had the criminal record. And I said, well, I'm happy to do the expunction analysis and see if that offense is eligible to have it erased. And that way you can apply to get your CNA. And she said, thank you so much. That would be great. And I said, like I do with all of my clients, you know, what are your other goals? Is there anything else that I can help with? And she said, well, I mean, it's a goal, but it's you know, nothing that you could help with. But she had brandings from the trafficker, and they were quite evident. And she said, these just piss me off. I'm just sick of looking at it. These brandings, it's a reminder all the time. And I said, oh gosh, I'm really sorry. And well, I'll get back to you when we finished our legal research, and perhaps you can come back in and we can talk about strategy. So I went back to my office, and I just felt the energy from her about how she felt about her brandings, which felt more powerful to me than the pursuit of expunction. We went along and of course did the expunction analysis, but at the same time, we contacted a tattoo removal professional in my area and said, do you know what pro bono is? No, it's doing work for free. Would you do some work for free for a very deserving person? He agreed to do that. I connected the client with the tattoo removal professional, and that got done. But to my great disappointment, when I did the expunction analysis, I learned that the type of offense that she had engaged in while she was being trafficked was not eligible for expunction, because at the time, our statute in North Carolina only allowed for prostitution-related offenses to be erased from your record if it was the result of being trafficked. That has since changed in our state and many others, including yours. So I said, oh goodness, so I have to bring her back in and tell her, the terrible result of, the fact that we aren't going to be able to help her with the legal work she asked us to do. So she came in and I said, I have terrible news. You're not eligible for expunction, but in 10 years time, there's another statute that might kick in. So let's both keep each other in mind for the next 10 years. And she goes, I don't care about that. I don't have the brandings anymore. And she had such joy. And in that moment, again, this is really early in me doing this work, I just learned that we may have a lot of legal tools, but we also have some other tools, which is what you talked about looking at someone and really trying to understand what would be meaningful to them. And I think in that moment, just of innocence, we did that, and we were able to give her some restorative justice that didn't require filing anything in court. And that was really educational for me. Sweet. But also on this theme of less is more, I have another client. She is still my client, and she's a victim of forced labor in a nail salon. And she was terribly, terribly abused and forced to work and uncompensated for many years. And she was referred to me by law enforcement to represent her in the federal prosecution of the trafficker. And that has gone very well. And she did a wonderful job testifying. She was willing to testify. And then it came time in preparation for sentencing. And that's kind of a big part of what we do, is we help people, as they create their victim impact statements, what they want to say about the impact on them and how that might affect the sentence that the court renders, and restitution. There's a chance they might get, compensated for that work. It's a really important part of what I thought, restorative justice would be. And she said, I absolutely don't want to participate in sentencing. I don't want to go. I don't want to prepare a victim impact statement. What matters to me is to move on from that experience. And that was really humbling for me to understand, oh, that's right. Whatever he or she or they define as justice needs to be the legal that we pursue for them. So as much as I thought she would do a wonderful job at sentencing and it'd be really impactful for justice, that wasn't justice to her. My third example that I'll give is a survivor of forced labor who, we talked about the fishing boats this morning, was trafficked on a fishing boat out of the African country where he is from for a couple of years, and just experienced tremendous abuse. And he, like so many of our clients and survivors we support, was coerced into engaging in criminal conduct here in the United States once he was eventually brought here. So he has a significant record. And he came to my office, and I thought, oh, this is such an injustice. We're going to see if we can clear up this record. And we went through the options and talked about what it might look like. And he said, I don't want to undo that conviction. I don't want to go through that. I don't want to resurrect that all again. But can you help me do? And he asked for two things, which are really two very reasonable legal measures that we can take. And so we're working on that now. But it's just been a great lesson for all of us that do that work, that we may have this idea of this big, bold solution, but that might not be what our clients want. And that's, again, what ought to lead. Second theme, I just want to touch on again, but Kathy did a great job of doing it. We already said so many of our, particularly our sex trafficking clients, although I just mentioned a forced labor client that has a criminal record, is such a big part of the experience. It's a effective trafficker tactic to force or coerce criminal activity in order to keep someone to keep working, or to make them think that they're less than and can never be hired or loved or have any place in our society. It has a huge impact, as we all know, on getting a job, getting housing, like that client with the tattoo I talked about, seeking an education. It's so debilitating. So in order to pursue restorative justice, to really pay attention to the post-conviction relief statutes in each of our states, because they really do vary, is just really important. And I know that there's advocacy happening in the California state legislature now to even further improve the post-conviction relief statute for survivors of trafficking. I'd mentioned the one in North Carolina, how it was just confined to those with prostitution convictions, but I can count on two hands how many clients I've had that were actually, arrested, charged, or convicted with prostitution offenses. It's just not happening as much anymore, which may be a sign of good things, but they have drug charges, firearms, assault and battery, so many others. So our statutes need to reflect the survivor experience, which is engaging in ancillary criminal activity and not just prostitution related charges. I want to mention, and this is sort of a PSA, there is a significant gap in our statutory framework when we're talking about supporting survivors and meeting their legal needs. I've been talking about expunction, getting state records expunged, and each state again is different. Some are more progressive. New York just passed the very first human trafficking post-conviction relief statute that will allow for relief of violent crimes. Most of the states that have progressive human trafficking statutes, like North Carolina, for example, it only allows for non-violent offenses. So if I have a survivor client that comes in with a violent offense, we can't go through that statute. Thankfully, there are some other statutes we can look into, but New York is, once again, setting the stage for really reflecting the experience of a survivor. If conduct was forced or coerced, it doesn't matter what it was, because that person didn't voluntarily engage in that criminal activity. So our statutes need to reflect that. So the significant gap I'm talking about is there is currently no federal statute to provide conviction relief for federal records. So there are survivors like those that have state records that have been federally charged or convicted for crimes, including engaging in human trafficking because of their perceived role in the trafficking scheme. So there's really no path for advocates and lawyers and survivors to pursue to clear those records the way that we do for state records. So we are hopeful that we will see a bill in Congress soon that will provide federal vacatur. The last theme that I'll talk about is not related to legal needs. I call it legal adjacent. And this came just out of our organic work for survivors. For so many years, I've been hearing, when I ask that question, what else would help on your journey in restoration? I have bad credit and I can't insert auto loan. I can't get a credit card. The landlord ran my credit check. So this emerged so significantly that in Charlotte, there's a program that's developed called the Charlotte Triage Pro Bono Partnership, which is a group of corporations and their in-house lawyers and law firms such as mine that come together to meet gaps in legal or other needs in the community. So we have structured a program in Charlotte where there's a lot of banks in Charlotte. I don't know if y'all know that, but we call it Banktown. And we have a lot of financial services professionals that want to support human trafficking survivors, but they don't really know where they plug in. So we've created a credit repair program. Of course, they're quite facile in matters of finance, so it's a great fit. And they help clients restore their credit. They get the credit report and they go through and they map what accounts might have, there was a nexus to the trafficking or not. And they work and they go to each creditor, collector, whatever agency is holding that particular account, and try to seek forgiveness, reduction, or a payment plan that's reasonable to the survivor. So it's sort of it's like the criminal records relief in that it can really lift the barriers that are getting in the way of housing, education, life goals, because we've come to learn that financial stability and security is so key to survivors avoiding re-victimization and further vulnerabilities. So I look forward to your questions, as I'm sure Kathy does as well, but it's no surprise to y'all that my message today is that in order to avoid re-victimization and again, more vulnerabilities, is access to free legal services in all of legal needs, access to restorative justice as defined by the survivor client, and access to financial inclusion for safe, secure banking, and just what would help on the way to independence.
doing on getting your questions submitted? Have your questions submitted? Am I on? Do I have to? Oh, now it's on. All right. So, wow, you guys are a dynamic duo. I told Kathy that when I was planning this particular plenary session, it was like being in somebody else's chemistry lab and wondering what was going to happen. And everything was just amazing. So let's start with the questions that we have. How do we access expungement resources and legal resources locally in Orange County?
Is that working?
It's good.
So, great question, whoever asked it. And I'm going to take this opportunity to pitch the National Survivor Law Collective once again, because we are a network. And of course, I don't offhand know of any pro bono attorneys in Orange County, but with one email, I can hopefully find someone, or at least someone that may know someone in Orange County. We've been so pleasantly surprised by the interest including large law firms wanting to do pro bono work and legal aid corporations expanding their services to help survivors and what their needs are. So you talked about the answer, what you hear when you hear no. And we try so hard at my program and at the collective to always say, yes, we found a lawyer for you. So that would be my answer. And then, legal aid organizations in your respective states could probably help connect you with a lawyer that does expunction work free of services.
And here in Orange County, we have the Public Law Center that are partners from the inception of our Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force. Invited them, they weren't able to come today, but if anybody wants to get connected, and probably Sarah, I'll get you connected. Kathy, can you speak to what happened with your felony charge?
So surprisingly, I still have it. So because I do this work, honestly, and when you get into helping other people, you just go off with helping other people. But mine was long ago. And so it's on its way to, I've been just blessed with so many opportunities that it has not been a barrier that it used to be, right? And so very, midway in my journey of overcoming, that wasn't a problem for me anymore, but I know that it is for others, right? And I know that it is for, no one wants that on your record. So it's like the branding that you talked about. I've had one of those too, and it was just such a relief to get that removed. The same thing is for your record, your criminal record. When you can get that removed, it's like oh, okay, it's gone. It's gone. So I am going to work on that now that I'll focus on me, but I hadn't had that as a barrier, just to answer your question.
Okay. Do the violent crimes include murder or permanent damage? And if so, how would you respond when it comes to the victim's justice? I think that's for you, Sarah.
Was that the question? Does it involve, did you say murder?
Uh-huh.
And what was the second thing?
Or permanent damage.
Permanent bodily damage, I'm going to presume. So you hear this disclaimer from every lawyer. This is not legal advice. And it does depend on your particular state about how a violent crime is defined. And as we advocate for this piece of federal legislation, I have learned that there are different definitions of violent crimes, which can be really benefit and again, reflect the victim experience. So I can't answer that flatly. My suspicion in your state is that murder is a violent crime and bodily harm, but again, not legal advice.
I just wanted to agree because I have personal experience with working with someone who's fighting that right now. And it was denied in the state of Texas, obviously, just because it is a violent crime in the state of Texas. Not legal advice, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can say that.
All right, good. Okay, keep your questions coming. They want to know if they can have your email address. I think it's on
Yes,
the
and
slide.
it was supposed to be on my last slide, but I think I was
There you
negligent in
go.
advancing. the
All
slide.
right, and you can also connect in the Whova app. How many of you have downloaded the Whova app? It's like you are forever connected, or at least for 6 months, because this event stays available to you for 6 months. You can go back and watch this session on Whova. It's like, oh, I should have written that down. Go back and watch it again, okay? Are there any, we work with survivors, so this is a nonprofit here in Orange County. How do we find an attorney here that is part of the collective?
You'll email me as a start. The National Survivor Law Collective does have a website. If you Google, you'll see there's 6 co-founding organizations. And so we have links on each of our pages. So you might land, I'll actually make a pitch to about Free to Thrive, which is a service provider based out of LA, but they serve, I think, the Bay Area as well. They do extraordinary work providing free legal aid to survivors in all of the areas that I talked about. And they do a tremendous amount of legislative advocacy at the state level and working with us at the federal level too. So that might be a great resource to try and access pro bono services as well.
Oh, I thought you had, okay. Are there any hard statistics on the number of reported child abuse cases and how many of those cases actually received trials? Not exactly sure.
I don't have a fun response other than to say, I'm sure a lot of your organizations work with NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they're really reputable and they do provide statistics. So that would be my response.
Okay. If you could change one factor of the legal system to make it easier for survivors, what would it be? Let's start with Kathy.
It would be making it accessible. So getting the legal help into the hands of survivors. It's very intimidating. Anything that has to do with the law, all we hear is law enforcement. And all we hear is, it's very divisive from victim to like understanding that law enforcement is actually here to help you and that we're on your side. There's a disconnect there because, sometimes it's used as under force or coercion to dissuade individuals from reaching out for help. So when you talk about, hey, you can get some legal advice, you can get some legal help, it's a foreign language. So how do we meet them where they are and get them? So I think our outreach initiatives need to change. First of all, we need to beef that up to get the information to these individuals that need it.
I agree, especially about, I know the questions aren't for me, I'm the facilitator, but for my students, Ruthie's taking care of all of our students here. That outreach piece, I think it's a training area that is a gap, not just here in Orange County, but elsewhere, because I've encountered people, we have legal services, I chipperly say, and then they're like, no, because they're afraid of other consequences. So they don't want to talk to somebody. So what would be part of, see, now I'm getting to my question, what would be part of that outreach that would make someone like the little girl you respond when I do the outreach?
Care coordination. So if I go in and I get medical services because I trust this individual that's been providing me medical help for X amount of years, if this individual is connected to legal resources, then she can tell me, he or she can tell me, hey, I have this resource that I think you might be interested in. With that care, with that coordination, then I don't fall through the gaps, right? Because now I have a medical team working that referred me to legal, and then legal could refer me to shelter. And that you see like there's a whole web that needs to be created before, instead of everyone working in silos, because I think that's how people fall through the gaps. And so I think care coordination is the answer to effective outreach. We all need to be working together so that we can reach the individuals that we're all working with, instead of working in silos. That's not effective.
I don't like silos. I agree. Kathy, you mentioned you were trafficked by the first man to show you love. How can you trust new people who show you love? How have people helped with that?
There's a saying that I usually say, and I won't say it here because it's not appropriate, but it's one that some survivors and overcomers will say. It's like being on the street. The one thing about being on the street or being trafficked or having to go through that situation is that you learn how to read people. You learn how to see through people. And so when I see someone being fake, I'm already turned off. When I see that you may have motive, I'm already turned off. But when I see that you're being authentic and genuine, I naturally gravitate to that. And so that's what happened with my healing process, is like people were genuinely showing me love. And so it made me want to love again, and it made me want to trust again. I'm married now, right? And who would have thought it's been two and a half years now. And I never thought I was going to be married again. I spoke it over my life. I was like, I'm not going to ever get married. I wasn't married before, but I never thought that I would be in a marriage like this. And like this meaning broken, fragile, traumatized, a survivor of trafficking. But I am. And it's the most beautiful love that I've ever experienced. And that came from people showing me genuine love.
I would clap, but my hands are full. Okay, Sarah, I bring people like you here because I want you to be a role model for my students. So someone anonymous said, what advice, Sarah, do you have for young or aspiring attorneys who want to work in this field one day?
I'm going to direct my attention over to this side of the room. I'm so glad to get this question, because when I was in law school or undergrad, I didn't even know what trafficking was. So that's one piece of good news, and all of this, a silver lining, is I feel like younger people and students are much more educated about this crime and victim experience. So that's great news. So my response is to get as much clinical experience as possible. Although lawyers are titled counselors, we're terrible at what we normally think of as counseling, right? Psychological counseling. So this collective that I talked about, we're having conversations with law schools about adding to the curriculum trauma-informed legal representation training, because we experience not just lawyers that support survivors, but any lawyer supporting anybody who's going through a legal need, which is usually a pretty challenging time in their life, need to be trauma-informed. So doing clinical work where you work with real people with real legal problems to have that, Kathy so well talked about that authenticity, and when you know someone's genuine, and if you could tell they're fake, you're turned off. That is a really important, I don't know if it's a skill or just something that people have, intuitively, but that's the only way to be effective and gain the trust of survivors, your survivor clients who have such mistrust of other people who have hurt them and systems that have hurt them. So it takes a really long time to build that trust with them. So having that clinical experience, and not just, studying about it and reading cases about it and all of that, but really doing the work and accessing those opportunities and receiving trauma-informed legal representation training would be my advice.
Last question. I'm summing up 3 questions about legal services for minors, for financial support because of mental disabilities from the trauma, and representing trafficked youth in dependency court, and major laws to protect minors who experience trafficking. Can you talk
That's
about
a lot
minors?
right there. One that is prompting me to mention something I'm not sure was on the slide about legal needs, but someone had mentioned psychological disability due to being trafficked. We are seeing an increase in survivors being successful in their disability claim denial appeals based on a diagnosis of PTSD or other trauma-related diagnosis. So that is an important area when you mentioned monetary support for those with mental health needs. So I just wanted to mention that. Representing children is really hard. I actually have a client I absolutely adore. She's an adult, and she's just really provocative and astute in the way she talks about her experience and the needs. And she said, there's so much focus on the children clients. And I was a child too, and I was trafficked then too. So I think that was really intuitive, that when we talk about all of our survivor clients and those who've been exploited, they were all, as you said, children too. And so what could we do to serve that child? Because that child is going to be an adult who, if we don't address the needs, is going to have to come into my office or have other, various wraparound service needs. But serving children is more challenging because of, understandably, the regulation around that. And I was having a conversation over lunch about how our model at my firm is to represent the expressed interest of the child. And so a lot of times it depends on your state, but a lot of times the lawyers that are appointed to represent children represent their best interest. Now, of course, there are times when a child's expressed interest may not align with their best interest in a way that would make the lawyer uncomfortable in representing them. That has not happened in my experience, but that's sort of a distinct model where we want to follow through on what that child wants. And that may change from wanting to be with dad to changing to, no, I now want to go into, a facility with other girls. It may change over time, but that's why working, we got to follow, as I said before, the path that the survivor goes on as their interests and goals change. But it does make representing children a little bit more challenging because of the regulation around that. But it's so important to represent children, because I'll make a shout out to, I'm sure you all are familiar with Shared Hope. It's a public policy organization in DC, and they put out a wonderful publication called Abuse to Prison Pipeline. And it talks about girls who experience sexual abuse and how that can give rise to criminal activity, which then can give rise to vulnerability to being trafficked. And then we're back again. And it's just a really well done piece. But that's really helped me to better understand the vast legal needs of children, which is often criminal defense. But then it's navigating the, child protective services systems and all the other support that they need.
All right. Last word to you, Kathy, and we're holding them from their coffee break. And actually, would you tell them who needs to come to your workshop on mentoring circles tomorrow?
Yeah, anyone who wants to work with survivors and overcomers of trafficking directly. I'm a strong believer in mentorship. I talked about it earlier, how it affected me and impacted me. And so if you have a desire to work with individuals or walk alongside, let me say that, walk alongside individuals who have this experience and do it successfully, then please do come to the workshop to learn about mentoring circles. It's a new concept.
All right. So you get a coffee break until 2:15, and then you come back for Safe Communities, Safe Children. We'll have Brooke Istook from Thorn talking about internet safe communities, Christine Snapper from Child Welfare, and Juliet Oliver from the DA's office. So we're going to go from prevention on the internet to intervention with child welfare to, I guess I'm going to call it deterrence. When we haven't prevented, how do we prosecute the perpetrators? So coffee break and come back. Thank you so much. Big hand.